The uses and misuses of Heidegger. What the ecology of fear obfuscates is thus a far more radical dimension of terror. Today, with the prospect of the biogenetic manipulation of human physical and psychic features, the notion of danger inscribed into modern technology, elaborated by Heidegger, becomes a commonplace. Heidegger emphasizes how the true danger is not the physical self-destruction of humanity, the threat that something will go terribly wrong with biogenetic interventions, but precisely that nothing will go wrong, that genetic manipulation will function smoothly. At this point, the circle will, in a certain manner, be closed, and the specific openness that characterizes being human abolished. That is to say, is the Heideggerian danger, Gefahr, not precisely the danger that the ontic will swallow the ontological, with the reduction of man, the da, here, of being, to just another object of science? Do we not encounter here again the formula of the fear of the impossible? What we fear is that which cannot happen, since the ontological dimension is irreducible to the ontic, will nonetheless happen. The same point is made in a cruder fashion by cultural critics from Fukuyama and Habermas to Bill McKibben, worried about how the latest technoscientific developments, which potentially give the human species the capacity to redesign and redefine itself, will affect our being human. The call we hear is best encapsulated by the title of McKibben's book, Enough. Humanity as a collective subject has to set down limits and freely renounce further progress in this direction. McKibben endeavors to specify such limits empirically. Somatic genetic therapy is still this side of the tipping point. One can practice it without leaving behind the world as we know it, since it simply involves intervention in a body formed in the old, natural way. Germline manipulations lie on the other side, in the world beyond meaning. When we manipulate psychic and bodily properties of individuals before they are even conceived, we pass a threshold into full-fledged planning, turning individuals into products, preventing them from experiencing themselves as responsible agents who have to educate, form themselves by the effort of focusing their will, thus obtaining the satisfaction of achievement. Such individuals no longer relate to themselves as responsible agents. The insufficiency of this reasoning is double. First, as Heidegger would have put it, the survival of the being human of humans cannot depend on an ontic decision of humans. Even if we try to define the limit of the permissible in this way, the true catastrophe has already taken place. We already experience ourselves as in principle manipulable. We just freely renounce the possibility of fully deploying this potential. In the technological age, what matters to us most is getting the greatest possible use out of everything. Does this not throw a new light on how ecological concerns, at least in their predominant mode, remain within the horizon of technology? Is the point of using the resources sparingly, of recycling and so forth, not precisely to maximize the use of everything? But the crucial point is that with biogenetic planning, not only will our universe of meaning disappear, in other words, not only are the utopian descriptions of the digital paradise wrong, since they imply that meaning will persist, but the opposite, negative, critical descriptions of the meaningless universe of technological self-manipulation also fall victim to a perspectival fallacy, for they too measure the future by inadequate present-day standards. That is to say, the future of technological self-manipulation only appears as deprived of meaning if measured by, or rather from within the horizon of, the traditional notion of what a meaningful universe is. Who knows what this post-human universe will reveal itself to be in itself? What if there is no singular and simple answer? What if the contemporary trends, digitalization, biogenetic self-manipulation, open themselves up to a multitude of possible symbolizations? What if the utopia, the perverted dream of the passage from hardware to software, of a subjectivity freely floating between different embodiments, and the dystopia, the nightmare of humans voluntarily transforming themselves into programmed beings, are just the positive and negative sides of the same ideological fantasy? What if it is only and precisely this technological prospect that fully confronts us with the most radical dimension of our finitude? Heidegger himself remains ambiguous here. It is true that Heidegger's answer to technology is not nostalgic longing for former objects which perhaps were once on the way to becoming things and even to actually presencing as things, the thing, but rather allowing ourselves to be conditioned by our world and then learning to keep the fourfold in things by building and nurturing things peculiarly suited to our fourfold. When our practices incorporate the fourfold, our lives and everything around us will have importance far exceeding that of resources, because they and only they will be geared to our way of inhabiting the world. However, all the examples Heidegger provides of keeping the fourfold in things, from the Greek temples and Van Gogh's shoes up to numerous examples from his Schwarzwald mountains, are nostalgic. That is, they belong to a world which is past, which is no longer ours. For example, he opposes traditional farming practices to modern technologized agriculture, the Black Forest farmer's house to a modern apartment block. So what would be examples that are appropriate to our technological times? Perhaps one should take very seriously Frederick Jameson's idea of reading Raymond Chandler's California as a Heideggerian world, with Philip Marlowe caught in a tension between heaven and earth, between his mortality and the divine shining through in the pathetic longing of his characters, and so on. And did Ruth Rendell not accomplish the same for British suburbia, with its forlorn back gardens, grey shopping malls, and so forth? This is also why Hubert Dreyfus's notion that the way to be prepared for the upcoming Kera, for the arrival of new gods, is to participate in practices which function as sites of resistance to technological total mobilization, is all too facile. Heidegger explores a kind of gathering that would enable us to resist postmodern technological practices. He turns from the cultural gathering he explored in The Origin of the Work of Art, that sets up shared meaningful differences and thereby unifies an entire culture, to local gatherings that set up local worlds. Such local worlds occur around some everyday thing that temporarily brings into their own both the thing itself and those involved in the typical activity concerning the use of the thing. Heidegger calls this event a thing-thinging, and the tendency in the practices to bring things and people into their own appropriation. Heidegger's examples of things that focus such local gathering are a wine jug and an old stone bridge. Such things gather Black Forest peasant practices. The family meal acts as a focal thing when it draws on the culinary and social skills of family members and solicits fathers, mothers, husbands, wives, children, familiar warmth, good humor, and loyalty to come to the fore in their excellence, or in, as Heidegger would say, their ownmost. From a strict Heideggerian position, such practices can, and as a rule do, function as the very opposite of resistance, as something that is in advance included in the smooth functioning of the technological mobilization, like the courses in transcendental meditation which make you more efficient in your job, which is why the path to salvation only leads through to full engagement in technological mobilization. The flip side of constant capitalist innovation is, of course, the permanent production of piles of leftover waste. The main production of the modern and postmodern capitalist industry is precisely waste. We are postmodern beings because we realize that all our aesthetically appealing consumption artifacts will eventually end up as leftovers, to the point that it will transform the earth into a vast wasteland. You lose the sense of tragedy. You perceive progress as derisive. In these ever-growing piles of inert, dysfunctional stuff, the growing piles of useless waste, the mountains of used cars, computers, and so on, like the famous airplane final resting place in the Mojave Desert, which cannot but strike us with their pointless presence, one can, as it were, perceive the capitalist drive at rest. Therein resides the interest of Andrei Tarkovsky's films, such as his masterpiece Stalker, with its post-industrial wasteland of wild vegetation growing in abandoned factories, concrete tunnels and railroads, pools of stale water, and stray cats and dogs wandering hither and thither. Nature and industrial civilization overlap here again, but through a process of common decay. Civilization in decay is in the process of again being reclaimed, not by an idealized, harmonious nature, but by nature in a state of decomposition. The ultimate Tarkovskian landscape is a river or pool on the edge of a forest, filled with the debris of human endeavor, pieces of rusty metal and decaying concrete blocks. The post-industrial wasteland of the second world is indeed the privileged evental site, the symptomal point out of which one can undermine the totality of contemporary global capitalism. One should love this world, including its grey, decaying buildings and sulphurous smells. All this stands for history, threatened with erasure by the post-historical First World and prehistorical Third World. Benjamin developed a notion of natural history as renaturalized history. It takes place when historical artifacts lose their meaningful vitality and are perceived as dead objects reclaimed by nature, or, in the best case, as monuments of a past dead culture. For Benjamin, it was when we confront such dead monuments of human history reclaimed by nature that we experience history at its purest. The paradox here is that this renaturalization overlaps with its opposite, with denaturalization. Since for us human culture is our second nature, we experience it as our natural habitat. Deprived of their function within a living totality of meaning, cultural artifacts dwell in an interspace between nature and culture, between life and death, leading a ghostly existence, belonging neither to nature nor to culture, appearing as something akin to the monstrosity of natural freaks, like a cow with 2 heads and 3 legs. Another less pathetic, but perhaps no less efficient strategy is that of Shindogu, the Japanese movement popular a decade or more ago, which manufactured objects which were useless in their very over-functionality, like glasses with small windscreen wipers for better visibility when you go for a walk in the rain, or a butter stick, like lipstick, for when you want to butter a slice of bread but don't have a knife, or an upwardly inverted umbrella with a water collector which not only protects you from the rain but simultaneously provides you with fresh water. Through this procedure, a kind of technological counterpart to ideological over-identification, our engagement with technology itself is turned into a means of distancing and releasing ourselves from its grip. The challenge of technology is thus not that we should rediscover how all our activity has to rely on our irreducible, unhintergebare, embeddedness in our life world, but, on the contrary, that of cutting oneself off from this embeddedness and accepting the radical abyss of one's existence. This is the terror which even Heidegger did not dare confront. To put it in the terms of a problematic comparison, are we, insofar as we remain humans embedded in a pre-reflexive symbolic life world, not something like symbolic plants? Hegel says somewhere in his Philosophy of Nature that a plant's roots are its entrails, which, in contrast to an animal, the plant has externalized, plunging them into the earth to prevent it from cutting itself free from its roots and roaming where it will. For it, such a rupture would equal death. Is then our symbolic life world, in which we are always already pre-reflexively embedded, not something like our symbolic entrails, which we have externalized? And is not the true challenge of technology that we repeat the passage from plant to animal, symbolically severing our roots and accepting the abyss of freedom? In this very precise sense, one can accept the formula that humanity should pass into post-humanity. Being embedded in a symbolic world is a definition of being human. And in this sense, too, technology is a promise of liberation through terror. The subject which emerges in and through this experience of terror is ultimately the cogito itself, the abyss of self-relating negativity that forms the core of transcendental subjectivity, the acephalous subject of the death drive. It is the properly inhuman subject.